What if I told you the United States could technically erase its entire national debt? But doing so might collapse the economy, spark political chaos, and permanently change how Americans live? Right now, the U.S. owes over $36 trillion. While you are at it, please click like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. That's more money than the entire country produces in a year. And yet, this isn't the first time America has faced a debt mountain like this. So the real question isn't, can the U.S. wipe out the debt? It's, what would it actually take? And who would pay the price? And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the most realistic path forward might be the most uncomfortable one. Let's slow this down, because the numbers matter. $36 trillion is so large that the human brain struggles to process it. If you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you almost 100,000 years to spend $36 trillion. This debt didn't appear overnight. It's the result of decades of wars, tax cuts, economic crises, aging population costs, and interest piling on top of interest. And here's the part most people miss. The U.S. is not required to pay off the debt like a credit card. Governments operate differently than households. Instead, they refinance it. They roll it over. They manage it. But there is a breaking point. And to understand where that point might be, we need to rewind. After World War II, the U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio hit 106%, higher than it is today. And yet, over the next 3 decades, that ratio fell to 23%. Not because the U.S. paid everything off, but because of 3 forces working together: massive economic growth, controlled inflation, and a population boom that expanded the tax base. Factories exploded. Suburbs expanded. The middle class grew. Debt didn't disappear. It just became smaller relative to the economy. This is a crucial idea, because when people say, wipe out the debt, economists hear something very different. They hear reduce the burden, not erase the number. And erasing the number? That's where things get extreme. To fully eliminate the national debt, the U.S. would need to do one or more of the following: massively raise taxes, drastically cut spending, engineer unusually high economic growth, inflate the currency, or sell off national assets. Each option comes with serious consequences, and none of them are politically easy. So in this video, we're going to walk through every major path the U.S. could take, step by step, and expose the trade-offs behind each one. Starting with the most straightforward idea on paper. If the debt is too large, one solution is simple: bring in way more money. But how you do that determines whether the economy survives the attempt. Let's break down the main revenue strategies one by one. One of the most powerful revenue tools governments use is a value-added tax, or VAT. Unlike income tax, a VAT is charged at every stage of production. You don't just pay it once. It's embedded in the price of almost everything you buy. Most developed countries use one. The U.S. does not. And that's why economists keep bringing it up. A modest VAT, even around 10%, could generate trillions of dollars over a decade. Sounds effective, right? Here's the catch. A VAT hits everyone, including low-income households. It raises prices across the board. And once implemented, it's politically very hard to remove. It would fundamentally change how Americans experience daily life. Gas, groceries, clothing, electronics. Everything costs more. And that leads to the next problem. The U.S. economy is built on consumption. If consumers pull back, growth slows. If growth slows, tax revenue drops. And suddenly the VAT is solving one problem while creating another. This is why VAT proposals often include rebates or exemptions, which reduce how much money they actually raise. So while a VAT is powerful, it's not a silver bullet. And it's only one piece of the puzzle. Another idea that keeps resurfacing is aggressive tariff expansion. Tariffs are taxes on imports. Foreign companies pay them, but consumers usually feel the cost. Supporters argue tariffs could raise revenue, protect domestic industry, and pressure trade partners. Some estimates suggest large-scale tariffs could reduce deficits by trillions over a decade. But there's a trade-off. Tariffs raise prices. They invite retaliation. They can slow global trade. And when trade slows, growth slows. Once again, revenue comes at a cost. This is where the debate gets emotional. Raising top income tax rates. Adding surtaxes on ultra-high earners. even implementing a wealth tax on net worth over a certain threshold. On paper, these could generate hundreds of billions per year. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even confiscating all billionaire wealth wouldn't erase the debt. There simply aren't enough ultra-rich people to carry the entire burden. And aggressive taxation risks, capital flight, lower investment, legal challenges, and reduced long-term growth. So while wealth taxes could help, they cannot solve the problem alone. This is the option no one likes to talk about. The federal government owns vast land holdings, buildings, mineral rights, oil and gas leases. In theory, selling or leasing these assets could raise trillions. But once sold, they're gone. Future revenue disappears. Strategic control disappears. It's a one-time fix, not a sustainable solution. By now, a pattern should be clear. Every revenue strategy raises money, but also introduces risk. And none of them, even combined, can painlessly erase $36 trillion. Which leads to the darker side of the equation. Because if you can't raise enough money, you cut spending. And that's where things get uncomfortable fast. Coming up next, we dive into radical spending cuts, entitlement reform, and why touching Social Security, healthcare, and defense could trigger the biggest political backlash in modern U.S. history. So here's the question to sit with before part 2. If eliminating the debt requires sacrifice, who should sacrifice first? Cutting spending sounds simple in theory. If the government is spending more than it brings in, the fix appears obvious: spend less. But in reality, federal spending is not a list of optional luxuries. It is a tightly locked structure built over decades, tied directly to millions of lives, expectations, and legal commitments. To understand why spending cuts are so politically explosive, we need to look at where the money actually goes. The U.S. federal budget is often misunderstood. Most people assume waste, inefficiency, and bloated agencies are the main drivers of debt. But when you break down federal spending, the picture becomes much clearer. Roughly 70% of all federal spending falls into just 3 categories: Social Security, healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid, national defense. Everything else combined, including education, infrastructure, scientific research, foreign aid, and government salaries, makes up a surprisingly small slice. This means that if the U.S. wants to seriously reduce its debt through spending cuts, it cannot avoid these 3 pillars. And touching any one of them triggers immediate backlash. Social Security is the single largest federal program. It provides income to tens of millions of retirees, disabled individuals, and survivors. For many Americans, it is not a supplement. It is the foundation of their retirement. Cutting Social Security is often described as political suicide, and for good reason. But from a budget perspective, it is impossible to ignore. The system was designed when people lived shorter lives. More workers supported each retiree. Wages grew rapidly. Today, the math looks very different. People live longer. Birth rates are lower. The worker-to-retiree ratio is shrinking. This means fewer people are paying into the system while more people are drawing from it. Without changes, Social Security's trust fund is projected to face shortfalls in the coming years. Economists often suggest several options: raising the retirement age to 68, 69, or even 70, reducing benefits for higher-income retirees, changing how benefits are calculated, increasing payroll taxes. Each option saves money. Each option also angers a large voting bloc. Raising the retirement age effectively tells people they must work longer, even if their bodies cannot handle it. Reducing benefits feels like breaking a promise after decades of payroll contributions. Increasing payroll taxes reduces take-home pay for workers who are already stretched thin. There is no painless version of Social Security reform. If Social Security is politically sensitive, healthcare is economically explosive. Medicare and Medicaid costs rise faster than inflation due to an aging population, advanced medical technology, higher treatment costs, longer life expectancy. Healthcare spending is not just large, it is accelerating. Healthcare is deeply personal. Cuts are not abstract numbers. They translate into fewer covered treatments, higher out-of-pocket costs, restricted eligibility, lower payments to providers. Any serious cost reduction risks limiting access to care. This creates immediate moral and political resistance. Common proposals include raising the Medicare eligibility age, capping federal Medicaid spending, reducing reimbursement rates to hospitals and doctors, introducing more means testing. Each approach reduces federal spending. Each also risks overburdened hospitals, reduced care quality, higher costs shifted to individuals. Healthcare cuts do not eliminate costs. They redistribute them. The United States spends more on defense than any other country. Supporters argue this is necessary to maintain global stability, protect trade routes, and deter adversaries. Critics argue defense budgets have grown far beyond what is needed, fueled by bureaucracy and inefficient procurement. Defense spending is not just weapons. It includes personnel salaries and pensions, veteran benefits, global bases, research and development, logistics and intelligence. Freezing or reducing the defense budget could save hundreds of billions over time. But it also raises serious concerns. Reduced military readiness, loss of global influence, job losses in defense-related industries. Defense cuts are often framed as a national security risk, making them politically difficult even when the numbers suggest room for reduction. Many people believe cutting government waste will solve the debt problem. In reality, discretionary spending makes up a relatively small portion of the budget. This includes education funding, transportation, scientific research, environmental programs, foreign aid. Even eliminating entire departments would barely make a dent in the debt. And many of these programs contribute directly to long-term economic growth. Cutting them may reduce spending today while increasing costs tomorrow. This is where the discussion becomes dangerous. Large-scale spending cuts can trigger economic contraction. When the government spends less, jobs are lost, consumer demand falls, tax revenue declines. This creates a feedback loop. Lower spending leads to lower growth, which leads to lower revenue, which makes the debt problem worse, not better. This is why austerity has repeatedly failed when applied too aggressively. Here is the unavoidable truth. Every dollar cut comes from someone. A retiree, a patient, a soldier, a student. There is no neutral target. And because voters are also beneficiaries, large spending cuts tend to collapse under public pressure. This is why, historically, governments rarely reduce debt through cuts alone. Which brings us to a quieter, less visible strategy. One that doesn't require votes. One that doesn't require announcements. One that works slowly, silently, and effectively. Coming up next, we examine economic growth, inflation, and financial repression, and how governments reduce debt without ever saying they are doing it. The question to consider before Part 3. If cutting spending causes pain immediately and raising taxes causes backlash, would a government choose a slower method that most people barely notice? If cutting spending is politically dangerous and raising taxes is publicly painful, there is a third option governments quietly prefer. It doesn't require a vote. It doesn't require a headline. And most people don't realize it's happening until years later. This strategy is not about paying the debt down directly. It's about making the debt smaller relative to everything else. When people hear the phrase, growing out of debt, they often imagine the government simply earning more money. But that's not how it works. The national debt is not measured in isolation. It's measured against the size of the economy. That ratio is called debt to GDP. If the economy grows faster than the debt becomes easier to manage even if the total dollar amount never goes down. This is exactly what happened after World War II. The United States didn't pay off its massive wartime debt by writing checks. It expanded the economy. After World War II, U.S. debt exceeded 100% of GDP. Instead of austerity, the country focused on industrial expansion, infrastructure, housing, education, population growth. As the economy exploded in size, the debt shrank in importance. By the mid-1970s, debt to GDP had fallen to historic lows. No dramatic paydown, no debt cancellation, just growth. That same playbook is far harder to repeat now. Post-war America had advantages that no longer exist. Young population, rapid productivity gains, cheap energy, less global competition. Today, growth faces structural limits. An aging population means slower workforce expansion. Productivity gains are harder to achieve. Global competition compresses wages and profits. To truly grow out of today's debt, the U.S. would need sustained real GDP growth above 3% for many years. That is extremely difficult in a mature economy. Growth only works if it outpaces the cost of the debt. This is the key condition most people overlook. If interest rates are higher than economic growth, debt grows faster than income. And for long stretches, interest rates have done exactly that. As debt increases, interest payments consume more of the federal budget. At a certain point, the government is borrowing just to pay interest on previous borrowing. This is where the conversation quietly shifts from growth to something else. Inflation is often described as a failure of policy, but historically, it has also been a tool. Debt is fixed in nominal dollars. Inflation reduces the real value of those dollars. That means inflation quietly shrinks the true burden of debt. Imagine you owe $1 trillion. If inflation cuts the value of the dollar in half over time, you still owe $1 trillion, but it's worth much less in real terms. Your debt didn't disappear. It dissolved. Inflation does not eliminate debt without consequences. The cost is paid by savers, wage earners whose pay lags behind prices, people on fixed incomes. Inflation acts as a hidden tax. It transfers wealth from the public to the debtor. In this case, the debtor is the government. Governments rarely admit they want inflation, but moderate inflation offers several advantages. It lowers real debt. It boosts tax revenue automatically. It reduces the pressure for direct austerity. Inflation allows governments to claim fiscal responsibility while avoiding explicit cuts or tax hikes. This makes it politically attractive. Inflation is a dangerous tool. Once expectations change, inflation can accelerate beyond control. Prices rise faster than wages. Confidence erodes. Markets panic. History shows that inflation, once unleashed, is difficult to contain without severe economic pain. This is why central banks are tasked with keeping inflation manageable. But the line between manageable and destructive is thin. When inflation alone isn't enough, governments can take a more direct route. Debt monetization. This occurs when the central bank creates money to buy government debt. In practical terms, this means the government is paying itself. The Treasury issues bonds. The central bank buys them using newly created money. The government gets funding. Interest rates stay low. Markets stay calm. On paper, nothing dramatic happens. In reality, money supply expands. Monetization allows governments to finance deficits cheaply, avoid immediate tax increases, delay spending cuts. It creates the illusion of sustainability. But illusions have limits. If monetization continues too long, inflation accelerates. If inflation accelerates too fast, confidence collapses. This is how countries slide from debt management into monetary crisis. The U.S. has avoided this fate so far largely because the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. That status buys time, but not immunity. There is another, quieter method governments use: financial repression. It sounds complex, but it's simple. Keep interest rates artificially low while inflation runs higher. This slowly erodes debt without announcing inflation or default. Capping interest rates. Encouraging banks to hold government bonds. Regulating investment options. Suppressing returns on savings. Over time, savers earn less than inflation. The government benefits. The public absorbs the loss. Financial repression is gradual. It doesn't cause immediate outrage. Most people don't notice until years later when savings feel smaller and retirement seems further away. By then, the policy has already done its work. This raises a fundamental question. Is it better to be honest and painful, or silent and slow? Austerity is visible and brutal. Inflation is invisible and gradual. Governments tend to choose what voters notice least. The danger of these strategies is complacency. If growth stalls and inflation rises too high, confidence in the currency weakens. If confidence weakens, borrowing becomes more expensive. If borrowing becomes expensive, the entire system strains. At that point, the conversation changes again, from managing debt to restructuring it. Coming up next, we explore unconventional and extreme ideas, from asset sales to digital currency proposals, and ask whether any of them could realistically eliminate the debt without collapsing the system. Consider this question. If debt can be reduced quietly through inflation and repression, how much instability would a government tolerate before the public pushes back? By this point, it should be clear that wiping out the U.S. national debt is not a technical problem. It's a political, psychological, and systemic one. Every traditional option, taxes, spending cuts, growth, inflation, comes with trade-offs that hurt someone. So when the debt grows too large to manage comfortably, people start looking for unconventional ideas. Ideas that sound bold. Ideas that promise a reset. Ideas that feel like shortcuts. This is where the conversation gets strange. One proposal that resurfaces again and again is asset sales. The U.S. government owns an enormous amount of land, infrastructure, and resource rights. Federal land alone covers roughly 28% of the country. On paper, that land is worth trillions. So the question gets asked, why not sell it? Underutilized federal land, unused buildings, oil and gas drilling rights, mining rights, airwaves and spectrum licenses. These are real assets with real market value. In theory, selling enough of them could meaningfully reduce the debt. Selling assets creates one-time revenue. Debt is ongoing. Once the assets are gone, they're gone. And many federal assets exist for strategic, environmental, or national security reasons. Selling them may fix a balance sheet problem while creating long-term risks. It's a temporary solution to a permanent issue. Another idea borrowed from smaller countries is a sovereign wealth fund. The concept is simple. Use national assets to generate investment income, then use that income to pay down debt. This works in places with small populations, massive resource wealth, low existing debt. The U.S. has the opposite profile. Large population, high debt, assets already deeply integrated into the economy. Building a fund large enough to offset interest alone would take decades. This is not a rescue plan. It's a long-term restructuring idea. This is the option governments rarely say out loud. Debt restructuring. It doesn't always mean refusing to pay. Sometimes it means extending maturities, lowering interest rates, paying less in real terms. For households, this looks like refinancing. For nations, it looks like a crisis. The US dollar is the backbone of global finance. Treasury bonds are considered the safest asset in the world. If that trust breaks, even partially, the ripple effects would be global. Borrowing costs would spike. Markets would panic. The dollar's reserve status would weaken. Restructuring would reduce debt, but damage credibility. That trade-off has kept this option firmly in the last resort category. At the fringes of the conversation, digital assets enter the picture. The idea usually goes something like this. What if the government used Bitcoin or another digital asset to pay off the debt? On paper, it sounds innovative. In reality, it's deeply impractical. The total U.S. debt exceeds $36 trillion. For Bitcoin alone to cover that, its price would need to rise to levels that exceed global liquidity. And even then, selling that amount of Bitcoin would crash the market. You can't use a volatile asset to pay a fixed obligation at that scale. Governments do not control decentralized assets. Relying on them introduces risks that policymakers are unwilling to accept. Digital assets may play a role in future financial systems. They are not a solution to existing sovereign debt. One of the most bizarre proposals involves minting a high-value coin. The idea is legally obscure, but technically allowed under certain interpretations. Mint a coin worth trillions. Deposit it at the central bank. Use it to fund the government. This is less economics and more legal engineering. While technically clever, it undermines trust. If money can be created arbitrarily through loopholes, the system loses credibility. Markets run on confidence. Once confidence cracks, no accounting trick can hold things together. Every unconventional solution shares the same flaw. They solve numbers, not systems. Debt exists because spending, expectations, and promises exceed sustainable revenue. Until that changes, no trick eliminates the problem permanently. Even extreme solutions only buy time. Here is the truth most discussions avoid. The U.S. will almost certainly never wipe out its debt. Instead, it will roll it over, manage it, inflate part of it away, adjust expectations gradually. This isn't failure. It's how large, complex economies actually function. Debt scares people because it feels personal. But national debt is not household debt. It's a tool, a liability, and a political weapon all at once. The danger is not the number itself. The danger is losing control of confidence. Every path forward involves pain distributed differently. Taxes hurt earners. Cuts hurt recipients. Inflation hurts savers. The question is not whether pain exists. The question is who absorbs it, how slowly, and how transparently. Up next in the final part, we bring everything together. What is realistic, what is fantasy, and what the debt actually means for everyday Americans going forward. Before moving on, consider this. If no option is painless, is the goal really to eliminate the debt or to keep it from breaking the system? By now, we've explored every major path. Higher taxes, deep spending cuts, economic growth, inflation, unconventional and extreme ideas. And one truth keeps resurfacing. There is no single lever that erases the U.S. national debt. There is only management. So the real question is not, how do we wipe it out? The real question is, what happens if we don't? The U.S. is in a unique position. Its debt is issued in its own currency. Its bonds are still globally trusted. Its economy remains massive and productive. This gives the government something most countries never get: time. As long as investors believe the U.S. can service its debt, the system continues to function. The danger begins when confidence erodes. Debt levels alone do not cause collapse. Loss of trust does. That loss can come from runaway inflation, political dysfunction, inability to pass budgets, uncontrolled interest costs. When interest payments grow faster than the economy, the system tightens. More money goes to servicing debt. Less money goes to everything else. That's when hard choices become unavoidable. Inflation is often framed as accidental. In reality, it is one of the least visible ways to reduce debt. When prices rise, savings lose value. Wages lag behind costs. Fixed debt becomes easier to repay. This quietly shifts the burden away from the government and onto households. It doesn't feel like a policy. It feels like life getting more expensive. Every real solution creates losers. Raising taxes angers voters. Cutting programs angers beneficiaries. Reducing defense angers powerful interests. So the system defaults to delay. Short-term fixes. Temporary extensions. Debt ceiling drama without structural reform. This keeps the system running while pushing costs into the future. In practice, debt management means keeping growth above interest rates, letting inflation do quiet work, adjusting benefits slowly, raising taxes indirectly. This is not dramatic. It's slow, political, and often invisible. That's why it works. You may never see a headline saying the debt was paid off, but you will feel its effects. Higher prices, longer working lives, more pressure on public services, greater reliance on personal savings. The system adapts by shifting responsibility downward, from government to individuals. Debt doom narratives thrive on fear, but fear clouds judgment. The U.S. has lived with high debt before. It has reduced it before, and it has restructured priorities before. The risk is not inevitability. The risk is denial. Here is the most realistic outcome. The U.S. does not wipe out its debt. It does not default. It does not magically grow out of it overnight. Instead, it carries it forward, manages it imperfectly, absorbs it through time. This is unsatisfying, but it is stable. The final question: debt is not just an economic issue. It's a mirror. It reflects what a society values, what it promises, and what it postpones. So the real question isn't how to erase the debt. The real question is this: what kind of future are we borrowing from? And are we using that borrowed time wisely? Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. See you next video.